Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for attending today's seminar. The title is Science Ball Seminar. We are very honored to invite William and Emily to give this seminar. I will let them to introduce themselves, and then they will tell you what is the science ball computation. And you can save your question to the end, or you can type your question in the chat, so they will answer all the questions after they finish their lecture. Thank you.
All right. So welcome to the seminar, everyone. I'm William. I am an incoming junior at Boise High School in Boise, Idaho.
Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily. I'm an incoming senior at Wayzata High School in Minnesota.
And today we will be going over a variety of science bowl topics. And this is our general overview of what we're going to do today. So we're going to go over the competition format. We're going to go over the subjects tested in all levels of the competition. We're going to go over the levels of the competition. We're going to talk about some common resources that are used sometimes at the middle school competition, but mostly when you're looking at higher level, I guess, deeper knowledge. And we're going to close off with our experiences personally and some of the incentives to actually participate in this competition. And then we're going to finish the day off with some questions. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and put it in the chat. And if it's something that we can answer or we are planning to answer, we'll do that like when the time comes. But if it's something that's like very relevant to the current thing that we're working on, then we will answer those as we get them. So.
All right. Move on to the next slide. All right, so the competition format. Science Bowl is a buzzer-style competition, kind of similar to Jeopardy, if you've seen that, generally played in teams of 4 players. There are 2 types of questions in Science Bowl, toss-ups and bonuses, and we will get into the details of what exactly makes them different in the following slides. Science Bowl is sponsored by the Department of Energy, so it's government sponsored, and it's available in both high school and middle school. So you can start as early as 6th grade, which is when I started, and you can continue playing all the way through your high school career.
They make it very obvious that it's sponsored by the Department of Energy in their questions.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go over each of these individual types of questions. So toss-ups are the first ones that we're going to cover. They're, I guess you can call the main portion of the Science Bowl experience. So they use a buzzer style, which will use a buzzer system that's similar to the one that's pictured here on the right. Essentially, there are 2 sides. Each side has 5 buzzers, but there are only 4 active players at a time, so one of them is just left unused. For each of the toss-ups, they are worth 4 points, and you get 5 seconds after the moderator has finished reading the entire question. Both of the teams may answer the toss-ups, although there are some restrictions, which we'll talk about in a second. And they come in multiple forms. So they come in either multiple choice or short answer forms. And multiple choice forms are usually when there are 4 options, and there will be W, X, Y, and Z. That's how they're going to be labeled. And if you're going to answer the questions in multiple choice, you must either answer the letter or you must answer the exact wording that is given to the right of each letter. So we'll show some examples of questions and what the moderator sees when they read. So that'll make more sense later. And this technique, or not technique, but this action of pressing a buzzer is called buzzing, and we'll probably be referring to that later on as well. So when you enter a toss-up, first you have to buzz. So you have to physically click it. And if your lighter lights up on this main terminal here, the moderator, which is the person who's reading and who will probably, so the moderator or the person who's monitoring the terminal, they'll be watching to see which light. And after that, they will acknowledge the number and the letter. So in this group, since we can call this A, call this B, this would be A4, okay? So they would acknowledge A4, and then you would say your answer, and then they would tell you if it's right or wrong. So if you say your answer before they acknowledge you, so if you interrupt the moderator while they're talking in the heat of the moment, while you're gonna snipe that answer, it'll count as a blurt. So your answer will be, I guess, nullified. So they're not gonna tell you if it's right or wrong, and they're not gonna give you points for it. And instead, they're actually gonna give 4 points to the other team. So essentially awarding them a toss-up, and then they have an opportunity to still answer the same question. Another way, so okay, if someone on your team buzzes incorrectly, but you know the answer, unfortunately, you cannot answer at that point. So once someone on the team answers incorrectly, that locks out the question for everyone else. And okay, everyone else on the same team, but the other team still has time to answer. And if you buzz before the moderator has completed reading, that is counted as an interrupt, and you are allowed to answer, but there's a penalty for getting it wrong. And if you get it correct, then you will receive the 4 points. If you get it incorrect, the other team will receive 4 points, and they'll have a shot to answer the question again, and the moderator is going to completely reread the question. So they'll have a lot of time because they already heard it the first time. So if we miss anything, we'll cover that later.
All right. And the second style of question are bonus questions. If your team correctly answers a toss-up question, you will receive a bonus question that is only for your team to answer. It is not a buzzer-style question, so you will not be buzzing in. And instead, you will be listening to the moderator read the question and then discussing within your team to come up with one team answer. Bonuses are worth a lot more points than toss-ups. They're worth 10 points instead of 4, and you also get a lot more time. So you get 20 seconds after the moderator is finished reading to answer the bonus question, as compared to the 5 seconds you get on toss-ups. And yeah, so only the team that got the toss-up is allowed to answer the bonus question. Even if the other team knows the answer, they are not allowed to answer. Bonuses, similar to toss-ups, also have both multiple choice and short answer style questions, and also have the rule of needing the exact wording on multiple choice if they are going to say the word answer instead of the letter name. So after 15 seconds is passed, the moderator will give you a 5-second warning, at which point it is recommended that you give your answer. And after 20 seconds has passed, they will call time and you are not allowed to give your answer anymore. The team's final answer will be given by the designated captain. So the captain must say the final answer of your team at or before 20 seconds is up. If you believe that there is a question or answer that is factually incorrect, or if the moderator accepted an answer that wasn't supposed to be accepted, or didn't accept an answer that was supposed to be accepted, you are allowed to challenge it. But this must be done before the next question is read.
Yep. Okay. So we're going to talk about some toss-up and bonus comparisons here. And basically, if you look down this row, there is basically nothing that's similar except for the answer choices. And there's a good reason for that. So toss-ups are generally seen as the way to kind of stack up opportunities to get points. But since 5 toss-ups is worth the same as 2 bonuses, if you get 2 toss-ups and 2 bonuses, that's going to be a lot more effective than just getting like 6 toss-ups, because that'll result in 28. 6 toss-ups is only 24. So you want to be able to nail down the bonuses, and that's usually the key to some of the really strong teams that score really high in some of the harder rounds. Although they might not get a ton of toss-ups, they usually nail the bonuses because you're allowed to discuss and share knowledge amongst your team. So another thing to be wary about is the idea of conferring. So you're not allowed to confer on toss-ups at all. If you talk, I don't think there's like a specific thing that they're going to do. Emily, correct me if I'm wrong. But usually you probably will lose. Okay, you definitely will lose your opportunity to answer. and that just gives more opportunity to the other team. And if you talk while it's not your bonus, so, well, the possession of a bonus is just the availability to answer. So if you talk while someone else is answering a bonus, then you might get a warning. Your team might have some issues. So just generally avoid that. The rules are pretty strict. You'll probably varies depending on how nice your moderator is. And remember that for bonuses, for the team members that are not the captain, no matter how much you yell your answer at the moderator, they will not accept it unless it's coming from the person who's designated as the captain. And the first answer from the person who's designated as captain will be, it'll be accepted. And I think you can, like, the captain can talk, just like not talk and look at the direction of the moderator as well. So that was a lot of information. Oh.
Yeah, the line is kind of fuzzy, like in terms of like what's a directed answer and what's not. So that's generally up to your moderator to decide. And so if you're a captain, just like look at your teammates or talk quietly.
Yeah, okay, so are there any questions at this point? Okay, let me look at this. And toss up, when some of our team blurts and gives 4 points to the other team, will the other team still have a chance to try to score another 4 points? So basically, yes, they will. That's why blurts and interrupts are so dangerous, because although if you interrupt, and so there's like a ton of strategy involved, right? If you interrupt and get the question right, that basically eliminates any possibility for the other team to get it right. And also, sometimes when you're behind, you want to interrupt to speed up the game, because then before time runs out, maybe you can get more questions answered. Although that hasn't really been an issue in recent times. But if you miss it, there are heavy repercussions. So know what you're doing when you interrupt.
Yeah, we should mention that one like game, they happen in like 2 8-minute halves. So like they're timed for 8 minutes. When time runs out, no more questions will be read, and that's like the end of the game. So whatever score is left after those 2 8-minute halves, that's the final score.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Okay. Are there any others before we move on to some of the specifics of questions? Okay.
All right, so there's a variety of subjects tested in Science Bowl. There's biology, chemistry, physics, math, earth and space science, and energy, where like geology and astronomy fall under the category of earth and space science. And all of these are pretty self-explanatory in terms of what kind of content they test, except for energy. Energy is kind of a potpourri of like all of these subjects. It's generally where the Department of Energy tries to promote all of their laboratories. They generally relate some science concept in any of these other categories to current research going on at one of their national laboratories. So energy is kind of a wild card in terms of what they're going to ask you. But these are the formal names of the high school categories. In middle school Science Bowl, some of them have a slightly different name. So biology would be called life science, and physics would be called physical science, but the other ones are all given the same name.
We'll go over some more information with these. So here are some of the example questions. You'll notice that this one is the first one, but the biology question is a short answer question, and the math question is a multiple choice. So I will try to simulate, I'm not an official moderator, but I'll try to simulate what you would hear essentially if you were doing this during a competition, okay? So they would say this: toss up 2, biology, short answer. What is the term for infections or diseases that are naturally transmissible from vertebrate animals to humans? And at this point, after I say the word humans, you would get a 5-second window to answer, or you could answer before then. But anytime before I say this last word of humans, or before I finish this last word of humans, it will be counted as an interrupt. So that's also kind of fuzzy, also similar to the captain directing. So if I said like from vertebrate animals to Hugh and then someone buzzes in, that would be an interrupt. But if I said like human and then didn't say the S yet, but someone buzzes and then I say the S while they buzz, like who knows? Just depends on your moderator's mood for that day. And you'll notice that here it says the answer is zoonoses, but except zoonotic. So for short answer questions, unlike the multiple choice questions, you don't get options. So there's a lot of, okay, not a lot, but there's a little bit of leeway. So if you say either of these answers, they will both be accepted. And in many cases, even if you don't say one of these answers, but it's like very close, if they like give, so after they say it's incorrect and then they tell you what the correct answer is or something, you can potentially challenge. This would be one of the situations where you want to challenge if you think that your answer is similar or exactly the same. So.
All right, there's also multiple choice questions. So we have some more example questions. The top one here is multiple choice, Earth in space. And you do have to give the exact wording here. So like if you said specific melting points with an S at the end, that would not be accepted. You'd be counted as incorrect. You do have to say exactly what is written, or you can say the letter. So here, if you buzzed in and said Y, that would be considered correct, and that is generally the recommended method of answering multiple choice questions. And yeah, here's another example of a physics question. These are kind of good examples of what sorts of things that Science Bowl asks about. They're not going to make you like prove a theorem or something. And like their math questions, they're generally pretty reasonable to answer in the time allowed. So the toss-ups tend to be pretty short, as shown here. And yeah, similarly to the question on the previous slide, these short answer questions do have a little bit of leeway in terms of what they accept. So word forms are accepted, and they sometimes have multiple answers that are considered correct.
Yep. So on this next slide, we have an example of an energy question down here. So this multiple choice question, for moderators, sometimes they'll have like pronunciations, so you don't really have to worry too much about the moderators messing up the pronunciations, but I have seen that multiple times. You'd be surprised at the level of pronunciation we have at Science Bowl sometimes, but usually they have it down pretty well. Now this one, you'd have to say O2. And if you just said oxygen for this one, it also wouldn't be accepted because what the moderator is going to read is exactly what is written here, which is O2. So like if you said oxygen gas, I doubt that would be accepted. Although technically that like, okay, yeah, but just be safe with multiple choice questions. And this, okay, so science, the DOE or the Department of Energy has a bunch of national labs all over. And usually they'll start all of their energy questions with scientists at blah, 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 national lab are, and then they'll have like the actual question. So once you hear that, you can like cry a bit, but then remember to stay focused for the actual question. And this is an example of a list type of question, which is encompassed under short answer. But for these, so they will generally list some number of numbers with stuff behind them, and they'll ask you for like ordering or identify all of the following, which blah, 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 or which of the following don't. So there will usually be more than one answer. Sometimes there's one answer, sometimes there are no answers. So just have to be really careful with these. And for these, you also want to, like the answer states, you want to say the numbers, okay? I believe they have a bit more leeway because it's a short answer. I don't know if that's like entirely true, but like if you said the collision of two neutron stars, or if you just said the collision of two stars, I'm not sure if they would accept that, but safest bet is just to go with the numbers. And when you get scratch paper, you want to write them all down.
Oh yeah, another big thing is like highly recommended to use scratch paper because there's math questions that generally require scratch paper, and then like taking notes of like what the question was what the question was asking, or the answer choices can sometimes be helpful, especially if it's multiple choice or if it's a bonus. That's very helpful. Another thing to be careful of on these list questions is you do have to say all of the answers that are correct, which is why interrupting can be kind of dangerous on these as well. So if there were 4 total options and you buzzed after only 3 were read, and let's say the first one and the fourth one were correct, but you only said the first one because you didn't hear the fourth one, that would not be correct. So you do want to generally listen to all of the answer choices on these list questions because they all must be taken into consideration, unlike multiple choice where sometimes if you hear one answer and you know it's correct, then you can buzz and just say that answer because you know there's only one correct answer.
Yep, that is a good point. So interrupts are generally really risky. So, okay, let me go back actually for this one. So, okay, if you looked at this question and you knew, okay, this is not a great example. Okay, for like this one. So if this is a multiple choice question and they didn't say the answer choices yet, and it's asking for the tangent of open parentheses pi plus theta. So essentially, you know, that's just going to be opposite side of the opposite side of the unit circle. So you know it's going to be equal to tangent theta again. But if they didn't read the choices and you already knew and you wanted to buzz in, if you came in and said tangent of theta, so you added that middle of, you would not receive that point. The opponents would be able to listen to it again, and you essentially just gave them the answer already, because they'll know that if you said tangent of theta, correct answer is probably tangent theta. So even if they didn't originally know, they know now. So just be really careful with your interrupts. And blurts, don't blurt. Blurting is bad.
Yeah, blurting is never beneficial. Interrupt can be a strategy. Blurting is never a strategy.
Okay, I'll go over this one. So the level of competitions that are covered in Science Bowl, so middle school and high school are the same, not in terms of like question difficulty, but in terms of different levels. So they both start with regional, and then they go to nationals. So regional generally encompasses like a large portion. So here in Idaho, like in Southwest Idaho, we also include some of Washington, some of Utah. I think those guys, there's like 3 teams from them, but they win more often than the Idaho teams. So that's just like an Idaho moment. But sometimes, although it's not true for every region, they will encompass different states. And they are actually, so national questions and regional questions. I think the overlap is generally, so the first question of, okay, so the first set of regionals is usually the easiest, or around the easiest. And then the last question of nationals, the last set of questions, is going to be some of the hardest. Usually like semis might be a bit harder than finals, but they will generally try to go up. And the format of the competition, I think, stays the same from regionals to nationals. It just maybe becomes a bit more tight like depending on how relaxed your regional competition is.
Yeah. So for example, in Minnesota, our regional competition encompasses only our state. So it's actually just called the Minnesota Regional State Science Bowl Competition. And I think depending on how big your state is, you might send one or more teams from your regional competition to the national competition. You do have to qualify from your regional competition in order to attend nationals. Not everyone can attend nationals. So for example, in Minnesota, you have to win the regional competition in order to advance to nationals. Everyone else stays at the regional level. And it's different for different states. Like, Will, you can talk about Idaho and stuff.
So yeah, well, for us, it's also for each individual regional competition, you must win it, but there might be different regional competitions. So like, and even though Idaho has like a combined population of like 12 schools, maybe like 9 of the schools are in one regionals, and then 3 of the schools are in the other. The person who wins the other 3, who wins among the 3, they can still move up to the national competition because they won their regionals. So they might not do as well there because like the standards of getting in were a bit lower, but they will still qualify.
Oh, and in terms of kind of the format of competition, there's generally 2 portions. Generally, these competitions last a day. So regional competitions generally last 1 day. Nationals is usually a weekend, sometime in late May. And the format is generally 2-parted. So there's going to be a round robin part, and a double elimination part. So where round robin, you're kind of put in a group and you play everyone in that group. And then depending on how many people you beat, you are placed in a certain place in the bracket in the afternoon. And then double elimination is like you lose twice, you're kicked out. And if you keep winning, then you keep moving up. But there are question difficulty changes even as you move along in 1 day for the tournament. So round robin questions are generally a lot easier than double elimination questions. And you also see a bit of a jump from regional level to national level as well.
Yep. And so I think round robin is still used in most regionals, but for some of them, including mine, we use a new system in place of the round robin at the very beginning. Oh yes, I think we'll go over that question at the end. But so we have this system, the Swiss system. So essentially, everyone's given a card with a number on it. So if you win, you get matched up with another person based on your card number. If you win, then the winner gets the higher number card. So if they started with the higher number, okay, not higher number, but okay, smaller number, but like, so like first is the top seed, second is the second high seed.
1.
Yeah. So basically, so you just switch cards, and then the number that you get will correspond to the part you will enter in for double elimination bracket. So yeah. All right. Okay, I'll go over this. So the national competition is generally a 4 to 5 day expenses paid trip to essentially Washington, D.C. I think there's a day where we just all get on a bus and just go to, I don't know what it's called, something mall. It's like the place where they have all the monuments. Okay. Yeah, that. So, it's really quite an experience. I think there's enough incentive just with the national competition, aside from like, oh yeah, you get some stuff, you win some money for your school, but the trip is like the main thing that people want, unless you're like from one of those top schools and you're like trying to win. But the trip is very that's quintessential to this entire idea of Science Bowl. So at nationals, okay, I'll be showing some pictures later, but at nationals, you'll notice that it's a 4 to 5 day trip. And as Emily said earlier, the competition actually only lasts a weekend. So those other 2 to 3 days are usually just activities that you do with other people. So sometimes you get to meet people that you would never meet before. Like I made a group of friends from Hunter College in New York, and I'm still in contact with them now, but we talked in like 2019. And so there's just like, without going to the National Science Bowl, you really wouldn't have met them. And it's a place where you can meet a lot of new friends. Although in recent years, since COVID, situation hasn't been exactly the same, but it's looking up. So hopefully we'll have that similar experience in the future. And I'll talk a bit more about some of the secondary activities later.
All right, so some resources or general ways people improve at Science Bowl. First, the biggest thing is practice, because Science Bowl, one thing that sets it apart from other science activities is its buzzer style. So in addition to knowing the content, you also have to be able to have good game sense, basically meaning you can buzz fast, you can strategize in terms of when to interrupt, when to buzz, like also like having team cohesion, knowing like I should buzz on this sort of question or leave this sort of question to the other person. Generally knowing when to buzz, that element adds a little fun, in my opinion, and complexity to this activity. So it's recommended to practice, and you can do that with sample packets that the Department of Energy posts online through this link. I don't know if they can click it, but
I'll put it in the chat. Hold on.
Yeah, okay. But they have a ton of like sample questions just from previous years on that website. I think they have like 12 sets of questions of 17 packets each, so a lot. And the earlier sets are from earlier years, and the later sets are from more recent years, which are generally higher quality. So those are the ones that you would want to look at to get a better feel of what next year's competition, for example, might look like. So yeah, it's highly recommended that you practice. Another effective way of studying is learning the content in the packets you play as well, not just like hearing the correct answer and being like, oh, I was wrong, or like, oh, I got it right. Or even if you get it right, it's still recommended that you study it. So for example, on multiple choice questions, you could look at the other answer options and learn what each of them are as well, learn why they are incorrect. If you get a question wrong or have no idea how to approach it, then obviously that's a learning moment. You can take note of that, take note of the concept being tested, Google it later on your own, and ask for help from your teammates as well. Science Bowl is a team competition, so it's super useful to use that resource, learn from your teammates, have fun together. In terms of subjects themselves, typically on a Science Bowl team, you don't want 4 people that do every subject, because that's a lot of content to cover for each person. So generally what you see is each person specializes in 1 or 2 different categories. So like, for example, I specialize in biology and chemistry, and Will specializes in biology and math. So basically people study specific subjects so that the entire team is strong on every category. In terms of how you can study for these subjects, for energy, you can't really specifically study for energy, so it's just recommended that you study for whatever for the other categories, and then energy will test on those categories. For math, it's a little different as well. Maybe Will can talk a little bit more about this, but because it's more like problem-based and a little more problem-based and less knowledge-based, it tends to be even more helpful to do a lot of practice for math. Practice problems, looking at competition math problems, generally building up your speed. Speed is a huge factor in Science Bowl math questions. And then for the other categories, what I found to be most useful is reading textbooks to get knowledge about each of these subjects. So like some recommended textbooks that we've seen people use. This is at the high school level, actually. This is the high school level. Probably don't read these if you're in middle school. That's a little different. But like, for example, for biology, the kind of foundational book recommended for that is Campbell's Biology, which is a general biology textbook that covers a lot of things that are tested in Science Bowl. For chemistry, people generally read Atkins Chemistry for general chemistry. If you want to learn more organic chemistry, sometimes people read Klein's Organic Chemistry. For physics, it's similar to math, and there's more problems and like math in there as well. So sometimes people will look at the physics Olympiads like F equals ma and USFO practice questions to kind of build your foundation in solving problems and learning more physics, using that as a guideline. I've also seen people use textbooks for that, like Fundamentals of Physics by Halliday, among other things. But yeah, that's another category for which practice is really important. I will note that at higher levels of the physics Olympiads, they tend to be more difficult than what is tested in Science Bowl, since there's only a limited amount of time you have to answer in Science Bowl. For Earth and Space Science, similar to biology and chemistry, generally people just read textbooks. Recommended ones are Tarbook and Lutkins for Earth Science, or Marshak for Earth Science. And then, oh yeah, I should probably just write these down. Okay, I'll write them down after I'm finished talking. As well as Seed's Foundational Astronomy. And yeah, if you have anything to add, I will paste the textbook names into the chat.
All right. Okay, so you can do that. This last section, which is energy, is kind of just a wild card. They'll test basically any knowledge they can somehow link to one of their labs, so they can like promote the lab and also like torture you at the same time. So why am I annotating? Okay. Yeah, so those are some of the textbooks, and make sure that you don't only read the textbooks and expect to show up to the competitions and know everything. No matter how well you know it, they're gonna find some obscure knowledge that you can only find on page 34 of Google. Because Science Bowl is generally good at doing stuff like that. Specifically with physics and math, I would say that unlike the other ones, which is just if you know it, you know. If you don't know it, you can guess, but it's going to be difficult. Physics and math, they basically all center around some form of each. So if you know combinatorics well and you can do them quickly, you'll be able to do all the Science Bowl math questions that are based on combinatorics. They're not going to throw some weird thing at you. If you know algebra really well, then they're going to make you do some limits or something. And with physics, if you know how to find like the deceleration time at this point with this type of momentum, that's all stuff that they'll cover and change up the numbers, and they'll ask for a number. So even if you don't know how to do, okay, so essentially there's not much you can really do with a textbook. The best practice you can do with physics and math, which are generally the buzzer race questions. So everyone knows how to do it. It's just seeing who can do it fastest. That's what buzzer race means. For those questions, you just want to make sure that you do a lot of practice and you get familiar and comfortable with what are known as stock questions. And stock questions are kind of just questions that you'll see very, very often, and you know how to work around them, and you know, like essentially the answer. It's kind of like if any of you do math counts, it's like the very first sample question, like, you know, how they put the question up and then it's like the tomato one and the answer is 56 cents. And that's probably all the information you know, but like essentially it's always there. So people get really familiar with it. And there are those types of questions in the Science Bowl as well. So you want to get really, really familiar with all the different types of questions that you see.
Oh yeah, and then for middle school, not recommended to read those books unless you're like super intelligent and focused or something. I know I probably couldn't sit down and read those when I was in middle school, but if you want kind of a introduction to like high school level science, I recommend checking out the Crash Course YouTube series. They do a pretty good job of explaining like important concepts in like easy to understand terms. It's based off the high school science curriculum, especially Crash Course Biology. I found that very useful. Yes, and someone just asked in chat, recommended resources for middle school. Yeah, I would say Crash Course, watch Crash Course videos for any of the subjects you're interested in. They have a ton. And then, I mean, after that, you're probably ready to, at least for biology, start reading a little bit of Campbell. Someone asked, what are the books for math? There's not really books for math as
You can use Art of Problem Solving, the AOPS Volume 1 book. I think that basically covers all you really need. And then you'll want to know, for middle school, that should be everything you need. There's very minimal competition math in middle school. It's mostly just like find x given that like 3x plus 7 is equal to 4x minus 4 or something like that. And oh yes. So yeah, that's just the AOPS volume 1. AOPS is also a very, very good resource for just competition math in general. You probably won't need as much stuff as they go into on that website, but yeah, that is very true. And for math questions, so the answers, they can be both. They can have only terms and they can also have just numbers. So like maybe something they're gonna ask is, how many ways are there to arrange 7 objects such that object A and object D are first and last, and object C and object B can't be next to each other, something like that. And that's just gonna require a numerical answer. But there's also like the one we talked about earlier with the tangent. So there are a bunch of ranges, and sometimes they will like call it a chemistry question, but ask you to do like a HH equation, which is like Henderson-Hasselbalch. I just combined those. So so they might use combined like subjects, because that's also seen in biology a bit, and you're using math essentially to calculate like pKa, but that's not stuff that they're gonna categorize the questions on their main like the main subject that it falls under. So
yeah. Basically what he's saying is there are computational components for the other subjects as well occasionally, because you do use math and chemistry a lot, and definitely physics. And I will say math is not always computational as well. Sometimes they will ask you like geometry questions. Sometimes they're like, which of the following shapes like has like diagonals that are perpendicular bisectors or something, or like what does the graph of this equation look like, or things like that, where you're not going to have a numerical answer.
Oh, and that brings up a good question from earlier. So an earlier question was, are the competitors able to see the questions, or are they only able to listen to them? So I think they're like experimenting with some other stuff at like the national final level, but most of the time you're only able to listen, because that kind of cuts out the issue with like maybe some people are dyslexic. That's going to cause a disadvantage. And also because reading time isn't technically as important to them. So that's why everyone's like restricted to a certain rate, because you're not allowed to read them. Okay. Are there any more questions, or are we good to move on? And if you think of questions later, you can always just ask them and we'll cover them at the very end. We're getting pretty close too.
Oh, wait, I wanted to add one more thing, which is like generally for math, if you have like, that's actually really such a general statement, but generally if you have like sufficiently advanced enough math in school, that's like enough for Science Bowl. It's more of like about how fast you can do it. You do need to know a little bit of calculus at higher levels for high school, but they're not usually, they're not going to get into the weeds really until maybe like the really advanced national levels, in which case you can prepare for that once you get there. But
Yeah, I would agree with that. So if you know like some basic competition math, because I don't think like combinatorics and stuff is taught at school until high school, like late high school. If you don't know that and you want to learn it, AOPS is a very good resource to use for that. So now we're going to talk about some of our personal experiences and what we've kind of received from Science Bowl.
Yeah, so like I said, I started doing Science Bowl in 6th grade and I'm still doing it through my high school career. It's been really like beneficial for me to have kind of a structure for studying as well, because obviously I'm really interested in science and I like studying. It's always nice to have that community as well of people who all love science as well, are willing to talk with you about it, nerd out about it, and have fun doing science together. I know I've met a ton of really amazing people through Science Bowl, even though nationals were all virtual the past couple of years. I have met a lot of amazing people at my school and in my surrounding communities in my state, to talk to you about science and just like be friends with. And I know it has also led me to kind of pursue more science and learn more. Led me to people who could advise me about like how to actually learn more, what sorts of resources, like the things that I told you guys about just now. I did not know about them like until like pretty recently. So pretty grateful for people who kind of can point me in the right direction, learn about these resources, and just learn more science, like not even just for like the sake of the competition, but also for learning more because it's fun, because it'll be useful later, and because it's interesting.
Yeah, so essentially, that's basically my experience as well. But I also did, like, that's kind of like the idealistic stuff that you kind of want to gain, that Science Bowl wants you to gain. But I got luckier in middle school. In 8th grade, I went to nationals with my magnet school team, and they took a bunch of pictures. So I'll show them on the next slide. So this one up here is us doing the cyber challenge, which is they always have a secondary little competition that's somewhat related to computer science, and they'll just have like a bunch of computers and you're like hackers, and it's like super cool. And there's like a live scoreboard and everything, and everyone's like running around drinking water. There's a lot of water here, and so it's just like a really good time. We also get to go on a lot of places that you normally wouldn't be able to go to. So here we're in front of, very far away, but in front of the Capitol. And then you also get to meet a bunch of new people. This picture, I still have no idea who this guy is, but you get to essentially interact with a lot of people that normally you wouldn't be able to. Like the example I made earlier with some of my friends from Hunter College. Although we haven't actually, we played them once, we rolled them, like it was a pretty bad score, but we're still friends, and I still react to like their stories with vomiting emojis. So there are a lot of stuff that you can pick away that you can take away that are not really you wouldn't really expect from a competition like this. And this guy's hair. So another thing that Science Bowl has really led me to understand is kind of the importance of group work. Because when you're one of those people who are like in classes that are like 3 years ahead, 4 years ahead, and you're just chugging away at schoolwork and you don't really talk to your classmates that much, you can miss out on the importance of working in things as a group. And there are just so many, I guess, so many benefits to being a group worker that you really just can't know until science pool. Because if you try to carry, well, it's been done before, like Joffrey from Wayzata.
Jeffrey.
Yeah, so there are, in most situations, to win science pool, you need to have a full team of committed members that will answer like an equal portion of questions and have really deep knowledge at each side. And if you try to cover that on your own, it's just not going to happen. So I think that's about it. There's a really cool video of one of my friends hitting a pull shot like behind the back. It's fabulous, but I couldn't dig that up again. So unfortunately, you guys are just gonna have to be left with that subtle description. So here's our little bit of time for questions. I received a couple. So the level of math at Science Full, I would describe it as school math, and then math counts school math, and then you combine them and then make them a little bit easier so you can do them in 5 seconds. So if I were to give an example, it'd be like, what is the expanded form of the expression x minus 3 squared? Like open parentheses, x minus 3 squared. And yeah, you can also look at the sample questions. Those are a really, really important resource.
Yeah.
So
determining the level, if you want to like learn more about what type of math is tested, like instead of us describing to you, which might be helpful, I'd recommend also looking at the examples. They will tell you exactly what sort of things are tested.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, personal prizes. Most of the time, like other than the trip, you get a trophy. You win $500 or $1,000 depending on where you live for your school science department. If you do good at Nats, you also, Nats just means nationals. If you do good at nationals, you will get more money. If you win the national competition, you get a lot of money. Do they get like a space camp thing, or is that math count?
The people who win the national competition get a trip to Alaska.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So
all expenses paid. Oh yeah, I should mention the trip to DC is like paid for by the government, so you don't have to pay for that.
Anything.
Yeah.
They also give you food.
Yeah.
They give you like little stuff.
They give you like little gadgets for the national competition too. Like they give you a bag of like shirts and frisbees and random stuff. Yeah.
It's really exciting to open this thing.
Yeah. Everything has the Department of Energy name on it because that's their chance to like promote themselves. Mm-hmm. Someone asked what the difference between Science Bowl and Science Olympiad is, which is a great question. They are actually pretty different. So as we mentioned, Science Bowl is a buzzer style competition. You have to, speed is a huge factor. I guess it's important in Science Olympiad too, but not as much. Like the buzzer style is a big thing that makes Science Bowl different. Science Olympiad, from what I understand, they have a ton of different events or kind of categories that you can compete in. Some of them require builds. So some of them you might have to build a physical object that is then tested at the competition. Some of them make you, like, I think most of them just make you take a test that's timed, and you generally have a partner that you can work on it with. So yeah, if I would say biggest difference, Science Bowl is more fast-paced buzzer style, Science Olympiad more long-term builds and taking tests.
Yep. I've never done Science Olympiad, so I don't really have much to say on that. What happens if a game ends in a tie? So for every round except for the last round, I think it just goes as a tie. I don't think they do anything about it. Do they? Maybe in double elimination they do.
I don't know.
But
I've experienced a tie, so.
So 2 years ago, when I was in middle school, but the high schoolers, they had a tie that went to 5 tiebreaker questions. and that was for like the nationals qualifiers. So that was the finals of regionals. And generally what they're going to do is they're going to read a question, they're going to give you time, and then you're going to answer. And I think they run through 5 of them. Oh, wait, no, they didn't have 5. They had 15. So 3 rounds of tiebreakers. So after 5 questions, whoever gets more toss-ups correct, there's no bonuses here. Whoever gets more toss-ups correct wins. And if they're still the same, it's like 2-2 or 1-1 or 0-0, which is kind of pretty common actually. You'll go to another round of tiebreakers and it'll just keep going.
Someone else asked what kind of test you go through to get into Science Bowl. So I know it changes depending on what school you go to. For us, anybody can participate in the club, like show up to practices and play Science Bowl for fun and stuff. But since it's government sponsored, so you're only allowed to like send a certain amount of teams per school to the regional competition. So for us, it's 3 teams. So in terms of competing in the actual regional competition, our school does hold tryouts, which I won't get into the details of right now. But basically, the leadership watches you play Science Bowl and then like picks the top 15 people to compete. But it is not like, you don't have to be like super amazing to participate in Science Bowl. Like I encourage you, even if you don't think you're like super amazing or like you're completely new to Science Bowl, I still encourage you to try it because everyone starts there. It's still super fun to participate and you still get what Will described of like meeting people, learning the skills of collaboration, being in a community where everyone loves science, and you can still learn a lot from it. Participating.
Yeah, and it really does depend on the school. I don't think there's an official test. For us, for Boise High School, we struggled to get enough people. So basically we just took whoever joined and then they just got a free trip to nationals because of team carries. But I'd say that the first time you participate in Science Bowl, like the actual competition, is really, really valuable. So no matter how bad you do, just the being there physically, answering those questions physically, moving around with your team physically, and just being in that environment just really makes a huge difference. So I think everyone who went to the first competition, so before with my magnet school, there were a ton of applicants every year. Everyone who went to the first competition would always, they'd show up again next year, right? The people who didn't go, they just quit. And even if they were like borderline, they could have made it next year, they just couldn't find the motivation. And I feel like the regional competition gives a lot of motivation. So if you're ever feeling like you're not getting enough motivation, just tough it out, because regionals is really quite an experience, even if you don't make it to nationals. And nationals is like its own little thing.
Yeah.
So
someone else, or the same person, asked any tips to get into the Science Bowl team. One thing I would say is like persistence. Like keep going each year. I'd say like I didn't make the team as soon as I joined Science Bowl, but like as you improve, as you play more, develop your buzzer sense and like learn more science, obviously, that will definitely help. Another thing I would say is like talk to people that are like older than you. Like they can give you like specific advice of like their experiences as well. And then for me, in terms of specifics on how to improve at Science Bowl, we kind of went over this, but like studying, just going to practice, go to practice if your school has practice. That's really helpful for improving at Science Bowl. Play it a lot. That's how you develop a buzzer sense. There's really no other way, as well as like obviously developing good collaboration, kind of like being able to sense when other people should be answering that question instead of you, or when you should be that person answering it.
I'd say that Science Bowl is 50% like knowledge and then 50% game sense. So it is a game, like regardless of what they're making you answer, it is a competitive game. It's kind of like a sport. you need to understand the game. You need to play the game and not let the game play you, if that makes any sense. So if you like keep on getting pummeled by another team because they time their interrupts really well, they collaborate on the bonuses really well. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do in regards to playing Science Bowl and not just answering science questions in a chair, which is probably the main difference between that and Science Olympiad.
Yeah, another thing is like observing other people, like good players when they play, like how they play, where they buzz, that is good. Also like knowing yourself too of like, do you actually know this answer and is it a good idea to buzz right now? Like that's something important to develop as well. For some people, it's developing confidence in themselves. For some people, it's learning to hold back. It depends on who you are. But yeah.
Role of a captain. So main role is for bragging rights, right? If you're a captain of a winning team, that's like better than just a member. But like I guess in terms of science, like the actual competition, yes, they answer the bonus questions. They also, I think, like speak for the team when we're talking about like team information. So like at the very beginning, they're gonna ask you some information and then write down some stuff. So I think the captain is also like the main person who they go to for that.
Yeah,
and they sit in the second chair.
Yeah, and I think they also have the captain like sign the score sheet after the round is over to like verify, yes, we agree that this is the correct score. And it actually is important to like actually look at it. There have been people where they like swapped the score of the two teams and then the captains didn't look and they just signed it. And then it was like, yeah, it was a whole mess. So that's another thing the captain does. But I guess in terms of those kind of like besides those like administrative things, it depends on what your team like dynamic is like, but sometimes the captain can also be a motivator, a like reminder, a like pep talk giver. Yeah, it really depends on like what your captain is like, what your team is like. But there's a lot of roles that the captain can fill. It depends on what, like I said, what your team dynamic is like. Someone asked, how can you become the captain? I mean, it changes depending on what school you go to, which team you're on. Generally, it's like chosen pretty organically of like, this person makes sense to be the captain. They're like an authority figure. They're more experienced or something like that. Or like they know how to pronounce things. That could be another reason you chose to choose someone as a captain. But there's no really like concrete way to do that. It's generally pretty, organic, like I said.
Yeah. Generally, sometimes a supervisor, like teacher supervisor, will have a say in it. Like, so when I was a sophomore, this other guy was a senior, but he was like really bad at recruiting people because his personality is like super abrasive and he like just loud. So she just told me to be the captain, so that like it would be easier for people to join the team. And I don't know if that really worked because we barely got enough people anyways. But yeah, I would say don't stress too much about being the captain. Don't like try to force yourself into the captain position if you're not as experienced, because that could have some negative consequences for the rest of the team.
Yeah. It's also like generally not too good to be like too competitive within your team. Like it's a team like sport. You want to work together and build off each other's strengths and not be too like trying to push each other down because you want to like be in a certain role or anything.
Oh, and the question that we got before this entire seminar about how to like start a club or like how to compete in Science Bowl without an existing team at your school. So you're gonna want to start a club. And usually a club, I don't know if it's the same for all schools, but you need a teacher supervisor and you need like a specialized room and set of times that you're going to be in that room. And once you do that, once you get enough people, your school will most likely fund your science bowl, like the stuff that you have to pay to compete, and then you just go to regionals and compete. So if you like, the good thing about forming a club is that you will probably be able to choose who you like to be on your team, honestly. I don't know how like good that is, but you have a lot more say in what you're gonna do. But the downside, obviously, is that there's not as much infrastructure in place. Like, I don't know, Miraloa and North Hollywood, they're gonna have a lot of existing resources and stuff that they already know what to do. But then like if you just start a club at another school, you're probably not gonna have as many people who are interested, not as many teachers who are interested, probably no buzzer system, and you're gonna have to buy that, and those are expensive. So you just really have to get in touch with the administration that you want to work with, know what funding you're going to need, and advertise a lot. So those are the tips I mainly give.
I'd say it's really important finding a teacher advisor to kind of sponsor you and kind of guide you, especially if you're in middle school. But yeah, it can be kind of complicated making your own club, but I will say don't let those like big name schools discourage you from starting your own club, because everyone starts like that, and like everyone roots for the underdogs anyways. So don't be afraid to start your own club, and don't be like discouraged, I guess, by like, oh, these people already have like so many resources, but you can do it too. So
all right, do you have any more, or because I don't have any more questions from people? The signs will only exist in the US. Yeah, I'd assume so. There's probably different ones for different regions, but since this exact specific, the NSB, the National Science Bowl, since it's sponsored by the Department of Energy, there might be some international schools that are allowed to compete, but I highly doubt it.
yeah, it's sponsored by the US government, so probably just for the US. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay. If you have like other like students specifically, if you have any other questions about Science Bowl or want like more specific information, I guess you can email me here.
Yes. Yes, to both of those. There will be a recording. You can also email me. I don't know if I'm going to be as responsible as Emily, but you can try. So yeah, if there are no more questions, then yes, good luck everyone in your Science Bowl endeavors, and see you again, probably never.
Yeah, good luck everyone. Hope you join Science Bowl.
Hope
Maybe
this
we'll
was
see you.
somewhat interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for the speaker and thank you for attending.